celebrating 17 years of possibility. Pilot Flying J and Halloran Hilton Hill present Anything is Possible. Today's guest, Scott West, Part 1.
This is Anything is Possible. I'm Halloran Hilton Hill. My guest today, Scott West. Welcome to the broadcast.
Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
I love your personality.
Well, I love your personality.
I mean, you're alive.
We've met a few times over the years, and you've certainly always seemed like a great guy when I've met you. Now, obviously, we haven't been on a road trip yet, but I'm looking forward to that when we do.
This will be a wild one. Where are you from originally?
I'm from Lenoir City. Went to Lenoir City High School. Yep.
Really? What was it like growing up in Lenoir City?
I was born in Louisville, Kentucky, and then I wound up at Lenoir City before there was a McDonald's, before there was a Walmart, before they dammed the Tellico River and made the Tellico Lake, is when I lived in Lenoir City. So we were down there with a very small town. I loved it.
Brothers and sisters?
Yeah, I've got one brother who's 18 months older than me, the kingpin of what we'll talk about soon enough, and my two younger sisters, Paula and Sandy.
What was it like growing up there?
Well, I had gone to Fern Creek High School in 7th and 8th grade, which is weird. In Louisville, Kentucky, there was this, for 2 years I was in that high school. I was on a wrestling team, but 7th and 8th grade is very different than 9th through 12th grade, but they had them together. And it was during, at the time I was there, the nationally televised race riots occurred at my school.
Do you remember the energy of all of that?
Yeah, it was very, there was a lot of anger, from the kids from both sides. It was very chaotic.
How did it make you feel?
Well, I was mostly afraid. When you're, I'm 7th grade, I'm a little bitty guy, and there's all these big giant guys around you and stuff, and there's a lot of anger, animosity.
Do you think that had any impact on the direction of your life?
I think one of the biggest factors in the direction of my life, and I have never actually thought about this, but was that I was the last kid in my class to hit puberty. And I think that puts a real big chip on your shoulder.
So you were always the runt.
You were
always the last and the least, which, did that give you something to prove?
Intense drive, yeah.
So at your last one to hit puberty, you're in the middle of this hyper-energetic world right now, and you're trying to discover who you are as a young man, and you get taken from that to...
After 2 years, and my dad acquired a convenient food mart in Lenoir City, and we moved to Lenoir City, and it was just so peaceful. It was so peaceful. It was amazing. So that's what I remember. And then, of course, I discovered Dungeons and Dragons, and I lived in a fantasy world for my entire high school. I was a total nerd.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when did you hit Dungeons and Dragons?
When I went to Lenoir
D&D.
City.
And tell me how you got lost in that world.
It's a strange game because that's just back before people were using computers. So it was a game where you imagined everything, and it was like like watching the movie Lord of the Rings. That was the first movie I'd ever seen that actually surpassed my imagination in terms of the visuals. So that's kind of where my brain was already. So it was just a fantasy world. But I had these goofy friends, and we would play every Friday night. I didn't go on dates or do anything like that. I would play Dungeons and Dragons with my friends.
I've never thought about this until this moment. I'm a creative person. I'm always doing something creative. If you don't have a place to use your creativity, it can turn in on you, right? And I never imagined like a game like Dungeons and Dragons just being a context or a place where you can let your creativity and your imagination run.
It's weird because it's a game, but you create the world. Like I was the dungeon master, so I would create the world that the other players entered. So I was a kid that I could have been. Do you remember the stories where a kid would go into the subway or whatever and they go underground in New York and they would lose their mind or whatever? That was me. I was like completely. I wasn't even in the real world for a while. I was completely in that world.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll figure out what happened to the Dungeon Master. This is Anything is Possible.
Possibility powered by Pilot Flying J, Covenant Health, Home Federal, and the Knoxville News Sentinel. Coming up.
It's a different world now than when I was doing that. Now we're on the cusp of legalization of cannabis. I mean, breaking the law to sell that wasn't an immoral or unethical act, so I could live with that.
Scott West is my guest on Anything is Possible. The one word that I would never have thought of to use for you is nerd.
All my friends were nerds. I was always drawn to the kids that would get picked on. I didn't like bullies, and so I always befriended the kids that would be the ones that would get bullied.
Man, this is all making so much sense to me, because if you're the last and the least, the run of the litter, what you want most is control of your world and your narrative. As dungeon master, you're creating and controlling a world, right? And as a defender of bullies, you're making it right for what was done wrong to you. What liberated you from the dungeon?
Well, I guess I finally did discover dating and went to college, and dungeon mastering was left behind. It was fun, but when I moved on and discovered beer, music, girls.
Dating will do it. Beer will do it.
I went to UT, University of
So what did you
Tennessee.
study at University of Tennessee?
I got a creative writing degree, which I used later.
Really?
I became a new type of dungeon master later and used my creative writing degree to write actual books. So I wrote about 3 books while I was on adventure sabbatical, and then I wrote 4 more recently.
I love this guy right here. I loved it. So let's talk about, you leave the University of Tennessee, and then what do you do with your life? What do you decide?
I was a server at Ruby Tuesday on the World's Fair Park. I met Bernadette, who was an international flight attendant, who was my wife, I guess around 1990, and then we got married and noticed that downtown Knoxville, people were ashamed of it, that they talked about Chattanooga as the shining city on a hill, more or less. And so we set about trying to do something about it. So we wound up with, in the Old City, back in the 1990s, I was the Old City Neighborhood Association president. We had 3 businesses down there. My whole family was down there with us. And I wrote like a walking tour of what things to do, because people would come to Knoxville, and then they would come in our store, which was Earth to Old City, and they would say, "Is this it? Is there nothing else to do?"
Wait a minute. I didn't know Earth's Old City was your store.
Started that about close to 30 years ago.
Wow.
And I'm only 25, which is weird.
So you decide, I'm going to change the image of, once again, following the theme, somebody's picking on my city.
People were really embarrassed. You remember this. People were embarrassed of downtown. So when we started doing all that stuff, like I created my own walking tour, because just so that when people said, "What is there to do?" I gave them something to do. I paid for it myself. I put it in 40 stores around downtown. It was called Lost Tales of the Old City. And then the New York Times picked it up and put it on the front page of their travel section, verbatim, what I'd written. And so I was proud of that. I was happy with it. So right now, the inside cover of the magazine on Tennessee, the Visit Knoxville ad, is a picture I took with my camera phone in the alley of Market Square of an artist painting, which I find to be full circle, because I was doing that in the 90s in the Old City, and I'm still doing it now on Market Square, which is supporting the arts, supporting downtown, supporting history, supporting music, supporting culture.
Did you care anything about making money, or was it larger?
But I'll tell you what, money's always been a tool for me. I've never bought nice cars. I mean, we had a 1965 El Camino. We lived in a little house that Bernadette bought when she was in college in Fort Sanders. Every dime we made went back into renovating historic buildings. After 10 years in the Old City, which is 2000 now, Bernadette's like, it's got to happen on Market Square first. It can't happen in the Old City first. So we pulled up stakes, 3 businesses, everything we were doing, and moved up to Market Square. We acquired 6 buildings. And
I remember when you could drive down Gay Street or walk on Market Square, nothing.
It was tumbleweeds.
Literally, it was that bad, and that's when you guys decided to invest.
Yep. So basically, there were some things that happened in the Old City, and the difference in a West Town mall and an Old City is the advertisers aren't strong. So if something happened in the Old City, then we could get pressed that overnight there was a girl that was abducted near the Old City. That became the Old City, and business dropped 50% in half overnight. And so all kinds of businesses went under in the mid-'90s. And we're like, it's got to happen up on the hill first. So we pulled up stakes, went up to the Market Square, spent a year drinking coffee and tea and eating breakfast with this old Turkish guy named Fikret Cinkay, who liked Bernadette. So after a year of that, then we basically I couldn't get him to, I couldn't figure out what to do to get him to sell us the building. So finally, he wouldn't let us in them. So I said, we don't care if the buildings are condemnable, because he wouldn't let anyone in the buildings. I said, it's just the real estate we want. So we don't care if it's condemnable, just sell us the building. And then he let us in. And I went, oh, because the roofs were gone. It was like funnels going down into the middle of the building. When it rained, it was like a waterfall right into the middle. So we went into that and set about trying to revitalize those historic buildings, which obviously it's come a long, long way on Market Square since then.
So you're a businessman and you're buying this property that's dilapidated and it's condemned. Your bankers have got to be going, what in the world?
Bankers? What bankers? Nobody wanted to open a business in downtown on Market Square, and no bank would loan to us. We went to all the banks downtown. They all said no. I went to all the, Mike Chase, Randy Burleson, all those kind of folks that are very successful, Stir Fry Cafe. No one, they would say, we wish you all the luck, Scott. We hope you for the best, but there's no way we're going to Market Square. So that put us in this weird position, which turned out great. Life gives you lemons, you make lemonade, right? So we're in this position where we have these buildings, banks won't loan us money, nobody wants to rent from us. So I go to my mother-in-law. She was in real estate in Kingsport. She loaned us $1.3 million. I put the $1.3 million in the bank. Then I go to a bank in Cedar Bluff. I went to, or actually it was Paper Mill Road, and, more or less West Knoxville, not from downtown. And I get a loan for $1.35 million based on having $1.3 million in the bank. So then we began to develop these buildings. Well, guess what? It's a lot more expensive than that to develop 6 addresses on Market Square. This is our first foray. So myself, I had, in a galaxy far, far away in another time, I had been involved in the transportation of cannabis from Mexico to Knoxville and around the Southeast. So I went back to my brother, who was still in that business, and basically said, partner with me, I can launder the money. So then he gave me $2.1 million in cash, which I used to finish developing the buildings on Market Square, which later caused me some problems.
So you've got this incredibly creative mind. I mean, that's what really is coming out of this. But you got $1.3 million from your mother-in-law. You got $1.3 million from a West Knoxville bank because of the $1.3 million you got from your mother-in-law. You still don't have enough money to do what you envision. Yep. And you have been in another enterprise. Yep. Let's stop right in here for just a minute, because I want to get back to Market Square because this is a redemption story.
It's a different chapter.
Yeah, a different chapter. When did you get into the business of being the weed guy? I mean,
when I was in college, I would sell weed. The way.
But you became a major distributor.
Yeah, it's a different world now than when I was doing that. Now we're on the cusp of legalization of cannabis. I mean, obviously everybody now admits the many benefits. You can run your car with cannabis. Henry Ford made a car out of cannabis that could run on hemp oil. So those things, people don't even realize that. That was back before 1938 when they made cannabis illegal, and people only associate marijuana, which is the term used as a drug by folks like Henry Anslinger that started the DEA, to vilify, to turn it into an evil thing. It's just a weed, which has a lot of, it helps with glaucoma, it helps with anxiety, like a post-traumatic stress disorder. It helps with all those things. But it became a drug versus a medicine. My brother would tell you it was a sacred medicine. He was all about it. And I'm like, well, Mike, it's illegal. It may be a sacred medicine, but it's still illegal. So we could get in a lot of trouble. So you need to be careful. But anyway, back in the day, we moved it when it was illegal all over the country. Nowadays, it's legal in a lot of states, and it will be legal. It's like arguing against the sun rising to say that cannabis is not going to be legalized in all 50 states, I think. It's as certain as I can be of anything. It's happening. But back then, it was illegal. So we did it, and it was it's profitable because it's illegal. But it's also something that, for me, there's a massive difference in immoral and unethical and illegal. People throughout history have broken laws that were unjust. So from my point of view, if you have something that's in my mind, is not evil or wrong, then breaking the law to sell that wasn't an immoral or unethical act, so I could live with that. But I also knew that I could get in a lot of trouble over it. So I was okay with that. But that's pretty much where we were. And I'd quit doing it when we, 10 years prior to Market Square, back in before we opened Earth to Old City, I no longer was involved in the marijuana business that my brother did.
I just thought about something. Kingston Pike was known as Thunder Road because they were running moonshine up and down that road. And I was stuck in traffic on Kingston Pike behind a moonshine delivery truck last year.
Yep.
And it's legal on the very road that they used to run. I thought.
And that happened while I was in prison.
So we'll talk about you going to prison coming up in just a moment. This is Scott West, and anything is possible.
Coming up.
They said, look, Scott, you're toast. You have no chance of beating us. We're going to put you away for 25 years, no parole. Done. I look over at my attorney. He's like, yeah, that's what they're going to do. They're going to put you away 25 years, no parole.
I guess when you see all these CBD oil places all over the place, and you see America, moving in that direction, you're like, what did I go through all of this for?
Like, first I say, I was right. I was right about downtown. I was right about Market Square, and I'm right about this too. What CBD? What that makes me think is, of course it's happening. Of course, cannabis is going to be legal. Period. And so, from my point of view, the persons that when I went to prison, half of all people that were going to prison were for marijuana. So, from my point of view, that has to happen, or the law never changes. So, I'm okay with it. It's like a chapter in my life. It happened. They seized. We were the DEA case of the year. That's how big the seizure.
How much? How much was it?
Well, I was a small part of it, but in my case, you're talking, $8 million. And so then when you look at my brother, he had land in Hawaii, he had underground storage facilities and safes, and there were other people involved. He had 25 E-Trade accounts and mines and
between you and your brother, how much did you guys control?
We were indicted for 25,000 pounds of marijuana and the $2.1 million in money laundering. So
he went to jail as well?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What was that like when you walk into jail?
It's the weirdest thing because with us, they put it, you don't get to self-report.
And why did you lose? Why didn't you lose all your assets? Right.
Well, we did. Bernadette and I had all the buildings were seized. They had tried to set up some things even at Bernadette's house, where our home, but Bernadette, always being smarter than me, never let anything happen in her house, which saved the house. And then the buildings were seized, that's where all the money was. There was no money laundering into any businesses. So the businesses were owned by my father and my sister. And so they're actually, ironically, part of the plea deal I made was first that Bernadette they said, look, Scott, you're toast. You have no chance of beating us. We're going to put you away for 25 years, no parole. Done. I look over at my attorney. He's like, yeah, that's what they're going to do. They're going to put you away 25 years, no parole. And then they said, but we're not going to let you plead out unless Bernadette pleads out too, because they can't seize our assets if she's not guilty too. So then they say to Bernadette, you can beat us, but Scott's going to do 25 years in prison if you fight us. So what are you going to do? So she says, well, I guess I'll plead out too. And so Bernadette wound up going down with me, and then they were able to seize the assets. But part of the plea deal was that the businesses had to remain open. And that's because, as you know, the value of Simon Malls, or the value of Westtown Mall, is created by the rents charged of the tenants. So if you close the tenants, then there's no value in the building. So at the time, there wasn't a demand to be downtown. And that's one of the other weird things about Market Square, is that because no one would rent from us, we had to create all the businesses. So we created World Grotto and Oodles Uncorked and Preservation Pub, which the name Preservation Pub means all the money goes back into preserving historic buildings, hence Preservation Pub, and on and on. All kinds of businesses. We probably opened a dozen. So from our point of view, if there were money laundering, it would have been the opposite direction because the businesses made money. We didn't launder money into the pub, because the pub made money. Why would we do that? We laundered money from the marijuana business my brother had into the buildings. So that's why they didn't seize the businesses.
So you go to jail, your brother goes to jail, they don't get your father.
My brother went to jail, I went to jail. My brother, the worst part is jail itself, because in jail there's no sunlight. You're not outside. I was in Blount County Jail. It's the worst, okay? It's like, this is really like a bad movie, that place. Because in the morning, the lights never go off. So it's always bright, right? Fluorescent lights. So you're in this bunk on this, non-existent mattress. You get up at 5:30, and they do these raids in the middle of the night with dogs and stuff, and search your cells, and all these big giant dudes come in. They're all practicing for raids and stuff on you. So we're in this pod. It's called a pod. We're in D pod, and they do these kinds of things. You get up at 5:30 and you eat. Every morning's oatmeal. Every lunch is peanut butter or really loose bologna, really loose. So like potted meat bologna. And every dinner is beans. And the only fruit is applesauce once a day. So there is no outdoor, there's no TVs. And the only books were like a few Reader's Digest, but I figured out a way that I could get van loads of books into the jail so that everybody got better literature while I was there. I heard that was all eradicated after I left, though.
We need to take a break. Your story demands part 2. So tell you what, we're going to take a break here. We haven't even gotten to like the biggest and best part of the story. This is Scott West. Part 2 next time on Anything is Possible.